I remember the exact moment he broke me. I was still in my silk nightgown, hair tangled from a restless night, when Nathan turned to me in the doorway. His suitcase was already packed. His tie hung loose around his neck, as though he couldn't even be bothered to look decent for the moment he'd chosen to discard me. "Elena," he'd said in that weary, almost bored voice, "I'm leaving. I've met someone more exciting." In my first life, I'd stood there, silent tears rolling down my cheeks as he walked out. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that any second he would turn back and say he was sorry. But he never did. He never even looked back. This time, when my eyes flew open to find dawn creeping through our curtains, it felt like a nightmare replaying itself. My heart lurched. For one terrible second, I thought I'd imagined everything. Every lesson, every betrayal, every day I spent rebuilding myself after he left. But as my gaze settled on Nathan's tall silhouette at the foot of the bed, I knew I'd been given a second chance. His lips parted. I didn't need to hear it to remember every word, but I let him speak anyway. I wanted to savor the last time he'd ever believe he had the upper hand. "Elena," he began, voice soft, almost pitying. "I'm leaving you. This marriage, it isn't working anymore. I've met someone else." I tilted my head, studying his handsome face, so confident, so smug, so sure he'd crush me. His blue eyes flickered with discomfort when I didn't burst into tears. Instead, I smiled. And in that single, stunned moment of silence, I knew precisely what I would do. I wouldn't beg. I wouldn't crumble. I wouldn't waste another breath trying to understand why my love was never enough. This time, I'd leave him with nothing. "All right," I murmured. My voice was calm, smooth. It felt foreign in my throat. "Thank you for telling me." He blinked, clearly thrown off by my composure. "That's it? You don't want to talk about it?" I shrugged lightly. "No. You've made your choice." Before he could reply, I swung my legs over the side of the bed and padded past him into the bathroom. My hands trembled, not from heartbreak, but adrenaline. My reflection stared back at me in the mirror. Pale skin, wide brown eyes, hair cascading over my shoulders. I looked fragile, breakable. Just as he liked me. But inside, I was steel. While he busied himself calling Serena, because of course it was her again, I closed the bathroom door and leaned against the cool tile. My mind worked faster than it ever had. I remembered every detail of our finances. The passwords, the hidden offshore accounts he thought I was too dim to notice, the transactions he made to support her when he claimed he was traveling for work. This time, I wouldn't stand in this house and watch my life be stolen. I'd walk away with it all. Minutes later, I emerged, calm as a priestess. Nathan glanced at me uneasily, phone pressed to his ear. I ignored him. In my past life, I'd spent weeks crying on that couch, blaming myself. Now, I felt nothing but clarity. I slipped into my study, shutting the door behind me. My fingers flew over the keyboard, logging in to our shared bank account. The balance blinked up at me. 7 figures, the product of my inheritance, and the funds he'd siphoned off from his firm's consulting expenses. My hand hovered over the transfer button. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. "Do it," I told myself. "Don't you dare hesitate." I initiated the transfer to an offshore account under my grandmother's maiden name. Every penny. I watched the numbers vanish into a blank balance. No going back. A tremor of savage triumph rippled through me. By the time I returned to the bedroom, Nathan was in the closet, pulling shirts off hangers like he was in some tragic movie scene. I felt nothing. No regret, no pity. "You'll regret this," he muttered without looking up. "I'm sure I will." I lied smoothly. "But not today." I pulled a small leather suitcase from under the bed and began packing my own clothes, simple, neutral pieces that wouldn't attract attention when I disappeared. Nathan glanced up, frowning. "Where are you going?" I looked him straight in the eye. For the first time, I saw the man he truly was, shallow, greedy, and ordinary. "Somewhere more exciting," I whispered. And with that, I turned away from the life I'd wasted loving him, knowing the next time we spoke, he would be the one begging. By the time the morning sun had fully crested the horizon, I was already a ghost in my own home. I moved from room to room, gathering only what I needed. My laptop, the original documents proving my inheritance, my mother's locket, and a few changes of clothing. The rest, every gift he ever bought me, every framed photo of our wedding, was worthless now. I could hear Nathan pacing in the kitchen, speaking in low, urgent tones on the phone. In my past life, I would have tiptoed around him, terrified of making the situation worse. But now, each panicked word he spoke only strengthened my resolve. I slipped back into the study to confirm the transfer had cleared. $7 million, gone from his reach. His voice rose on the other side of the wall, angry now, demanding to know why his balance was zero. I almost laughed. In that moment, I realized how easy it was to dismantle a life built on lies. All it took was the will to act. I logged out and took a deep, steadying breath. This was the point of no return. The first time, I'd let him walk out thinking he was the hero of his own story. He believed he was trading up to something better, someone younger, more exciting, more willing to worship his every word. This time, I would be the one to walk away. I pressed my hand flat against the smooth walnut desk, savoring the feel of it under my palm. I had sat here so many nights, waiting for him to come home. I had believed if I was patient enough, forgiving enough, he'd remember why he'd chosen me in the first place. But love had been a fool's currency, and I was done trading in it. I left the study and crossed the kitchen. Nathan ended the call abruptly, his face flushed. He looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Where is it?" His voice cracked. "The money. All of it." I kept my expression serene. "You mean my inheritance?" "You can't just," his jaw clenched. "Elena, be reasonable. We can work this out." I almost admired the way he shifted so quickly from arrogance to desperation. Almost. But it was too late for that. "I am being reasonable," I said softly. "I'm simply taking back what was mine." He reached for me, fingers tightening around my wrist. In the past, that gesture would have made me flinch. This time, I looked down at his hand with cold detachment. "Let go." "Don't do this," he hissed. "You don't understand what you're doing." "I understand perfectly," I said. "And you're wasting my time." He stared at me, as if searching for some trace of the woman who would have begged him to stay. She was gone. Buried with all the illusions I'd carried. Slowly, he released me. I stepped back and adjusted the strap of my bag on my shoulder. "If you ever try to follow me," I warned quietly, "I will make sure everyone knows where your firm's missing money really went." His eyes widened. "You wouldn't." I tilted my head. "Try me." For the first time since I'd met him, Nathan looked afraid of me. It was almost satisfying enough to stay and watch him unravel, but I had better things to do. I crossed the threshold without looking back. Outside, the world was bright and sharp, filled with possibility. My car was parked at the end of the drive, already packed. I slid behind the wheel, my heart thumping with adrenaline. I'd spent years waiting for him to change. Years hoping he'd remember the vows he made. Now I was the one rewriting the ending. As I pulled away, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. Nathan stood on the porch, still clutching his phone, still trying to understand how his perfect little plan had fallen apart. I felt nothing. My first stop was the small bank branch downtown where I kept a safe deposit box under my grandmother's name. Inside was my emergency passport, an old trick she taught me before she died, and the prepaid debit cards I'd loaded in secret, in case I ever needed to disappear. I'd never thought I'd actually use them. But the past has a way of preparing you for the day you stop being naive. I signed the paperwork and slipped the passport into my bag. The clerk never looked twice at me. To the world, I was just another well-dressed woman taking care of routine business. From there, I drove to a storage facility on the edge of town. I'd rented a unit in cash the day after Nathan first confessed to the affair in my old life. My name wasn't attached to it. No trail. Inside, I'd hidden a second car. An unremarkable sedan with plates registered to a shell company. I transferred my things into the trunk, locked the storage unit behind me, and climbed into my new escape. One last glance at the skyline of the city I'd once called home. One last breath of the life I was leaving behind. Then I drove away, without a single regret. The highway stretched out before me, wide and empty, like a promise. I rolled down the window and let the wind tangle my hair. For the first time in years, I felt weightless. I'd spent my entire marriage tethered to Nathan's moods, sacrificing every dream I had to fit the life he wanted. My career, my friendships, even my self-respect. All chipped away, piece by piece, until I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. But that woman was gone. In her place was someone who had no intention of disappearing quietly. I checked into a small seaside hotel under an assumed name. The place was modest but clean, perched on the edge of a cliff overlooking the water. The owner didn't ask questions. She handed me the key and wished me a good rest, and I climbed the narrow staircase to my room without once looking back. Inside, I kicked off my shoes and sat cross-legged on the bed. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder I'd created years ago, just in case. In my past life, I'd convinced myself it was petty to dig into Serena's background. Nathan had called me jealous, paranoid, insecure. But I'd been right all along. Serena was as ruthless as she was beautiful, and she'd done everything she could to make me look like the obstacle in their perfect story. This time, I wasn't going to let her win. I scrolled through the documents. There it all was. The falsified invoices, the hush money payments to her former employers, the string of NDAs she'd buried under her polished image. She was smart. Too smart to leave her fingerprints on anything obvious, but she'd underestimated me. I knew exactly where to look. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd memorized long ago. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Mr. Holt," I said calmly. "It's Elena. I have a job for you." He didn't ask how I'd gotten his number. Discretion was what I was paying him for. I need you to confirm a few details about Serena Walsh. Her employment history, her financial records, and any connections to my husband's firm. A pause. Anything in particular I should be aware of? Yes, I said. I believe she's been laundering money through shell companies. I want proof. Mr. Holt let out a soft chuckle. Understood. I'll be in touch. I ended the call and set the phone aside. My heart was steady, my hands still. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. In my first life, I'd thought revenge would make me as hollow as the people who hurt me. I believed the only way to survive was to forgive and move on. But I finally understood the truth. There was nothing wrong with holding people accountable for the damage they caused. By the time the sun set, I'd sent anonymous tips to 2 rival PR firms, attaching carefully edited copies of Serena's hidden contracts. I knew exactly how this industry worked. How a whisper could become a scandal in a single day. I closed the laptop and leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the last time I'd seen Serena in person. She'd been wearing red lipstick and a smug smile, standing beside Nathan at a company gala, while everyone pretended not to see how they looked at each other. She'd caught my eye and raised her glass in a silent toast, as though she'd already won. I'd gone home early that night and cried myself to sleep. I'd woken up the next morning pretending nothing had happened. Never again. Now, she would wake up to the same dread that had once suffocated me. I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I ordered coffee to my room and sat by the window, watching the waves crash against the rocks. My phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. Holt, consider it done. You were right. She's been funneling money into her own accounts for months. Sending the files shortly. I sipped my coffee, feeling the last traces of pity evaporate. Serena and Nathan had believed they were untouchable, that I'd always be too meek to fight back. They were about to learn how wrong they'd been. I spent the rest of the morning preparing the final blow. I composed a letter to the board of Nathan's firm, anonymous, of course, detailing the embezzlement and attaching every document Holt had uncovered. It would take time for the investigation to unfold, but when it did, they'd both be implicated. When I finished, I sent the email and sat back with a slow, satisfied exhale. This was only the beginning. I had disappeared from their lives without a trace, but I wasn't done with them yet. They would spend the next months wondering when the next strike would come and who was behind it. And in the end, when their empire was in ruins, maybe they would finally understand the cost of underestimating me. By the time I checked out of the seaside hotel, the first headlines had already started to appear. Scandal hits PR darling Serena Walsh. Sources claim financial misconduct. I skimmed the articles on my phone as I waited for the clerk to finalize my receipt. Each story hinted at something bigger. Corruption, betrayal, a house of cards built on stolen money and careful lies. I wondered if Serena had read them yet. If she'd called Nathan in a panic, voice shaking the way mine had once trembled every time he threatened to leave. It felt poetic, almost merciful. I slipped on my sunglasses and left without looking back. The next phase of my plan wasn't about them. It was about me. I drove south along the coast for hours, the car humming beneath me. With every mile, I felt lighter, freer, like I was shedding the last brittle husks of my old life. At dusk, I reached a quiet town perched above the sea. The streets were lined with whitewashed buildings and terraces overflowing with flowers. I'd visited once years ago, on a trip I'd planned for our anniversary, only to spend the entire weekend alone while Nathan worked. Even then, I'd felt a strange pull to this place, like it was waiting for me to come back under better circumstances. Now I understood why. I parked the car in a secluded garage I'd rented under another alias, and carried my bags up the hill to a small cottage overlooking the cliffs. The real estate agent had handed me the keys without questions, charmed by the cash deposit. It was perfect, secluded, anonymous, untraceable. Inside, the air smelled of salt and lavender. The windows were thrown open to catch the breeze, and the furniture was simple but comfortable. I dropped my suitcase in the bedroom and walked out onto the terrace. The horizon burned with the last pink flames of sunset. For a moment, I just stood there, watching the waves crash against the rocks below. This was mine. All of it. Not because Nathan had given it to me, or because I'd earned it by enduring years of his contempt. No, because I'd taken it back. The next morning, I woke before dawn, brimming with a strange, hungry energy. I'd spent so long shrinking myself to fit into his life that I'd almost forgotten what I was capable of. But here, in this quiet place with no one to answer to, I could finally remember. I started with small things. I went for long walks along the cliffs, feeling my body grow stronger with each passing day. I bought fresh food at the morning market, relishing the simple pleasure of cooking for myself. I read books I'd abandoned years ago, wrote in a journal, let the days stretch wide and unhurried. But I didn't come here just to heal. I came to build something better than the life I'd left behind. One evening, I sat at the little kitchen table, laptop open in front of me. My hands hovered over the keyboard as I considered the folder of documents I'd brought, business plans, ideas I'd jotted down in stolen moments when Nathan wasn't looking. He'd always mocked my ambitions, told me I was too soft to survive in business, too naive to understand how ruthless it could be. He was right about one thing. The world was ruthless. But so was I. I transferred a portion of the money I'd taken into a newly formed LLC and signed the paperwork to purchase a controlling stake in a small tech startup I knew would explode within the year. In my past life, Nathan had laughed when I mentioned investing in it. He'd said it was a waste of money. I couldn't wait to see his face when the headlines announced its success. When the final confirmation came through, I sat back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. This was what freedom tasted like. Not safety, because safety was an illusion, but the knowledge that I would never again let anyone dictate my worth. That night, I fell asleep with the windows open, the wind lifting the curtains like ghosts. But the only ghosts here were the versions of myself I'd shed. The frightened wife who clung to a loveless marriage. The woman who thought she needed Nathan to feel whole. She was gone. In her place was someone unrecognizable to the people who'd underestimated her. Someone who had learned that sometimes the only way to rebuild was to burn everything down first. I stared at the message for a long moment, my pulse steady and calm. The wheels were in motion. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, letting my feet sink into the cool floorboards. My reflection in the window didn't look like the woman who used to flinch when Nathan raised his voice. She looked composed, watchful. Like someone who'd stopped caring whether her revenge made her look cruel. I pulled on a sweater and padded into the kitchen. The kettle hissed as I set it on the stove, and the first pale light of morning spilled across the countertops. I made a pot of strong tea and carried my mug out onto the terrace. Below, the sea was restless, wind turning the waves into a froth. I felt a strange kinship with it. I sipped my tea and opened the file Holt had sent overnight. Screenshots of bank records, dated emails, contracts signed by Serena and countersigned by Nathan. All of it damning. All of it ready to be leaked to the right people. I could picture them both perfectly. Nathan pacing his pristine kitchen, cursing under his breath as he realized the extent of the damage. Serena, her perfect hair mussed from a sleepless night, fingers flying across her phone as she tried to salvage what was left of her reputation. The scandal was already spreading. The anonymous tip I'd sent to the firm's board had been verified, and an emergency audit was underway. Serena's PR agency was hemorrhaging clients. Nathan's name was being whispered in every boardroom, no longer as a rising star, but as a liability. I knew it wouldn't be enough to destroy them outright. Not yet. But it was the first strike. The first crack in their carefully constructed facade. I closed my laptop and let the breeze cool my flushed cheeks. In my old life, I would have felt guilty. I would have worried about how it made me look, about whether I was sinking to their level. But the truth was I didn't care. They had taken everything from me, my confidence, my security, my peace. It was only fitting that I take something in return. I spent the rest of the morning finalizing my own business arrangements. I signed contracts with a discreet broker to invest the remainder of the money I'd secured. I retained a lawyer specializing in asset protection and anonymity. I set up trust funds under my grandmother's name to ensure I'd always have a safety net. By noon, it was done. I was no longer the woman who had to beg for scraps of respect. I was someone Nathan and Serena would never be able to trace or control again. When my phone rang that afternoon, I almost ignored it. But curiosity got the better of me. Nathan's name flashed across the screen. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Hello. My voice was soft, polite, like I was speaking to an old acquaintance I could barely remember.
Anna.
His voice sounded frayed. Where are you? Somewhere you'll never find me. There was a long pause. I imagined him running a hand through his hair, the way he did when he realized he wasn't the cleverest person in the room. You took everything. I smiled faintly. Not everything. Just what belonged to me. His breath came ragged through the line. Do you have any idea what you've done? The board is investigating. Serena. I know, I said lightly. That was the point. Another silence. Then, low and desperate, I never wanted this to happen. Of course you did. I tilted my head, studying the waves beyond my terrace. You just didn't expect I'd ever fight back. You can't just disappear. I almost laughed. I already have. Before he could protest, I ended the call. My hands were steady as I set the phone aside. The satisfaction wasn't loud or gloating. It was quiet, like the hush that comes after a storm finally breaks. I had spent so long believing he held all the power, believing that love meant sacrificing everything. But now, as the afternoon sun warmed my face, I finally understood the truth. The moment I stopped needing his approval, I became unstoppable. And this was only the beginning. It took Nathan less than 3 weeks to track me down. Not to the little cottage overlooking the cliffs. I was too careful for that. But to the place he assumed I would return to eventually, The city where we'd built our life together, where I'd once walked invisible beside him, trying not to be in the way. I had no intention of ever stepping foot in that house again. But business required occasional appearances, and I was no longer afraid of being seen. So when the invitation arrived for a gala hosted by one of the tech firms I'd invested in, I accepted without hesitation. I wanted to look him in the eye one more time, not as the woman he'd abandoned, but as the woman who had risen from the ashes of his betrayal. I wore a simple black dress that skimmed my collarbone and ended just above my ankles. My hair was swept into a clean chignon, my makeup understated but polished. I'd chosen the look carefully, not glamorous, not flashy, but undeniably expensive. When I stepped into the ballroom, the hush was immediate. It was the same place where Nathan and Serena had first shown up together, pretending their affair was a great love story instead of a cheap power grab. I didn't flinch. I crossed the marble floor with my chin lifted, nodding politely at the curious stares. It wasn't the whispers that surprised me, it was how little I cared about them. I was halfway to the terrace when I felt the air shift. His presence was something I'd once felt before I ever saw him, a subtle tension that clung to my skin. I turned and there he was. Nathan stood near the bar, hands clenched at his sides, his suit impeccable, but his expression frayed. His gaze raked over me, searching for any trace of the woman who'd once hung on his every word. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe it was just that I finally saw him without the filter of love. "Elena," he said, his voice low and rough. I studied him in silence. The lighting was unkind, highlighting the sleepless bruises under his eyes, the lines etched at the corners of his mouth. He took a tentative step closer. "I've been trying to reach you." "I know," he swallowed. "You've made your point. You've hurt me." I felt nothing. Not pity, not triumph, just a quiet, detached clarity. "I didn't set out to hurt you," I said. "I set out to reclaim what was mine." "You could have left some of it," he said hoarsely. "You didn't have to burn it all down." "Didn't I?" My voice was soft. "After all the ways you tried to make me small?" He flinched. Elena, I made mistakes. But I didn't deserve." Don't finish that sentence. I took a step forward until only a foot of polished marble separated us. "You deserved exactly what you got." He looked stricken. "If you just talked to me." I did. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I talked to you for years. You only ever listened when I was useful to you." He ran a hand over his mouth, gaze darting around as if hoping someone would rescue him from this conversation. But no one dared interrupt us. "I'm ruined," he whispered finally. "Do you understand that? Serena is gone. She left the country last week. The firm is suspending me. My accounts." I arched a brow. "And you thought I would feel sorry for you?" His throat bobbed. "Please. I need something. Anything. I can't start over with nothing." It was almost funny. How a man who'd once held my heart in his hands could look so small now. I thought about the way he'd looked at me the morning he left. About the glee in Serena's eyes when she called me pathetic. About all the nights I'd sat alone in our cold bed, telling myself it would get better if I only tried harder. "No," I said simply. His eyes widened. "What?" "You heard me." I tipped my head, studying him like a stranger. "There's nothing left between us. Not love. Not pity. Not obligation. Elena." I held up a hand. "This conversation is over." I turned on my heel and walked away, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on my back. On the terrace, the night air was cool against my skin. I exhaled slowly, a release that felt deeper than any breath I'd ever taken. Nathan might have thought this was the end of his story, but it was just a chapter. I wasn't here to save him or mourn him. I was here to live. And I would never again allow anyone to reduce me to a footnote in their narrative. I didn't hear from Nathan again after that night. Perhaps he finally understood I meant every word, that there was no forgiveness waiting for him in my heart, no secret longing to be rescued from my own independence. Or maybe he was too busy watching everything he'd built collapse in slow motion. Either way, I didn't waste time thinking about him. I had more important things to do. I returned to the coast before dawn, slipping back into the rhythm of my quiet life. Mornings spent walking the cliffs, evenings with a glass of wine, and a stack of contracts to review. Every day felt cleaner, freer, like the air itself was rinsing the last traces of that old existence from my skin. But there was still one final thread to cut. Serena had disappeared when the first headlines broke. Most people assumed she'd fled overseas to avoid prosecution. But Holt had been worth every dollar I'd paid him. He tracked her to a villa on the French Riviera, a smug little hideaway she'd bought with stolen money. The authorities were still gathering evidence. The press had moved on to newer scandals. But I hadn't. I spent an entire afternoon composing the letter. Not to Serena herself. She'd never read anything I sent, but to the European division of the company she defrauded. I laid out the evidence in precise, chronological detail. The shell companies, the false invoices, the slush accounts hidden under layers of aliases. I didn't sign my name. I didn't have to. When I sealed the envelope and sent it by courier, I felt no satisfaction. Just a sense of finality, like placing the last stone on a grave. 3 weeks later, the story erupted across every news outlet from Paris to New York. Serena Walsh detained in international fraud investigation. I watched it unfold over coffee at a quiet seaside cafe, the headlines scrolling across my phone in neat, damning lines. Somewhere in the world, Nathan was reading the same articles, realizing there was no one left to clean up his messes. It was done. I'd never expected revenge to feel like this. Not thrilling or sweet. Just inevitable. As if all those years of silence had been building to this precise moment. I closed the news app and leaned back in my chair. The morning sun was warm on my face, and for once, the future felt as wide and luminous as the sea itself. That afternoon, I met with the lawyer handling my investments. He looked almost intimidated as he explained the details of my latest acquisition. The tech company I'd believed in had doubled in value within a month. My quiet gamble was about to make me independently wealthy, not just comfortable. Are you sure you want the trust structure this way? He asked, nervously adjusting his glasses. You'd be giving yourself total control of all assets.
No versas.
I smiled faintly.
Yes.
That's precisely what I want. Because I'd spent too many years with someone else's hand on the wheel. I would never again let another person decide my fate. That evening, I walked along the cliffs as the sky turned gold and lavender. I thought about the woman I used to be, how she would have shaken her head at all this. She would have whispered that it was too harsh, too final, too cold. But she had died the morning Nathan left. And I didn't mourn her anymore. Back at the cottage, I poured a glass of wine and stepped onto the terrace. The air smelled like salt and new beginnings. When my phone chimed, I almost ignored it. But curiosity tugged at me, and I glanced down. A simple message from an unknown number. I hope you find what you're looking for. I stared at it for a long time, feeling nothing. I didn't need to guess who had sent it. Nathan was clinging to any thread that might lead back to the woman who used to belong to him. I deleted the message without replying. What I was looking for wasn't in the past. It wasn't in any man's approval. It wasn't even in the satisfaction of revenge. It was here, in the quiet certainty that I had survived everything meant to destroy me and emerged stronger than anyone had imagined. The final blow wasn't the scandal or the arrests or the public humiliation. It was that I no longer cared. And that was something they could never undo. I woke before dawn on my last morning in the cottage. Not because I was restless or afraid, but because some quiet voice inside me knew it was time to move forward. The sea was calm below the cliffs, and the sky was painted in delicate strokes of pink and blue. I stood at the terrace rail for a long while, breathing in the salt and hush. This place had been a sanctuary, a liminal space between who I was and who I had become. But it was never meant to be permanent. I packed my few belongings into a single suitcase. No excess, no clutter. The rest I left behind. Old clothes, the teacups I'd bought at the market, the blanket I'd wrapped around myself on nights when I wasn't sure if I'd done the right thing. I no longer needed any of it to feel safe. When the car arrived to take me to the airport, I glanced around the little cottage one last time. A year ago, I would have felt a pang of sadness, maybe even guilt for walking away. But today, all I felt was gratitude. This place had given me the space to remember myself. To heal. To plan. To become someone I actually liked. I closed the door behind me, and the lock clicked softly into place. On the flight north, I watched the coastline drift out of view beneath the clouds. I thought of everything I'd survived, Nathan's condescension, Serena's cruelty, the dull ache of believing I was unlovable if I didn't sacrifice everything. And I knew, with unshakable certainty, that they no longer had any power over me. When the plane landed, I stepped into a city bursting with bright summer light and possibility. My new apartment overlooked a quiet park. The keys felt solid and real in my palm. I signed the lease without hesitation, my name alone on every line. No husband's approval. No need for anyone's blessing. That first evening, I unpacked in silence. Every item I placed on a shelf felt like a declaration. I am here. I am whole. I am not sorry. The next day, I attended a meeting with the startup's board. The executives, some old enough to remember Nathan, tried to hide their curiosity. The founder, a woman only a few years older than me, greeted me with a handshake that was firm and unflinching. You've been instrumental to our growth, she said quietly as the others filed out. We never knew it was you behind the investment. I prefer it that way, I said and meant it. We talked for an hour about strategy and vision. Not once did I feel dismissed or patronized. When I finally rose to leave, she touched my arm gently. Whatever brought you here, I hope you know you deserve everything you've built. For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. I nodded and stepped out into the sunlight. I walked back to my apartment along tree-lined avenues, a breeze lifting my hair. Every person I passed was a stranger. No one here knew my history or the woman I'd been forced to shed. I realized that was exactly what I wanted, a life not defined by what I'd endured, but by what I chose next. That evening, I sat by the window with a glass of wine, my laptop open to an empty document. I'd spent so long plotting my escape, my revenge, my survival. Now it was time to imagine what came after. At first, the cursor blinked against the white screen like a dare. But slowly, words began to flow. Ideas for new ventures, for charities I wanted to support, for things I'd always dreamed of doing but never dared. I wasn't naive enough to believe the past had no claim on me. There would always be echoes, fleeting shadows of the girl who once believed she needed to be chosen to have worth. But she was no longer driving my life. I was. When my phone buzzed on the table, I didn't look. The old Elena would have reached for it instantly, anxious not to miss a message from someone who never valued her. I sipped my wine, feeling the warm, steady calm of knowing I owed nothing to anyone. The next chapter would be mine alone to write. Just freedom, and the quiet, fierce certainty that I would never again let anyone's leaving define me.